Welcome again to the taster session of Rethinking Business Education workshop series. My name is Teresa and I'm the coordinator of professional development services at the EFMD, and I'm also the coordinator of this program. I'm really happy to see you all here. We have a lot of people joining us today. And it's really nice that there's so many people interested in this session and the set of workshops we have prepared for you. And the main aim of this webinar is to guide you through the tools required to develop an online strategy at your institution, and to invite you to the main workshop series that is starting on the 17th of February and is finishing on the 3rd of March. And contains 3 workshops, each of them focused on a specific part of strategy development. You will hear more about the facilitators later on, of course, but let me just inform you that this session is being recorded, and the recording is going to be put on the EFMD's YouTube channel. And also, please, if you have any questions during the session, feel free to ask the questions in the chat, or you will be led to ask your questions at the end of the session. And this is all from my side for now. And let me give the floor to our 3 amazing facilitators of the workshop series. Anne, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Teresa, and to EFMD for inviting to this Rethinking Business Education workshop. And welcome, everyone. Happy New Year. It's such a pleasure to see so many colleagues from business education field all over the globe. And I see some familiar names and many new. So welcome to all of you. The purpose for this 1-hour-long session plus Q&A at the end, it is to share some insight on developing effective online learning strategies, as Teresa introduced us to. My name is Anne Swanberg, and I'm calling you from Oslo in Norway. I'm working as an associate professor in leadership and organization at the BI Norwegian Business School. And I'm also associate dean for our digital courses and the former director of Learning Lab. So I've been working with online learning for many years. In this webinar, I also are drawing on my experiences from EFMD Global Online Certification System, where I had the responsibility of implementing the new certification system back in 2016. That was a work that gave me great insight and learning. And with me today, I have the pleasure to have 2 good colleagues from this work. And I will first give the word to Ginny Gibson.
Thanks very much, Anne. Welcome, everyone. Lovely to see you here, and a few familiar faces, which is brilliant. As Anne said, my name's Ginny Gibson. I'm an emerita professor from Henley Business School in the UK, and I was also deputy dean for a number of years. I've had an interest in online learning for a long time, and was the individual who brought Blackboard into the university almost 25 years ago. So it's something I've been involved with really for a major part of my career. I got involved with the EFMD and the development of EOCs with Anne and staff, and that was really insightful. And what we really gained a lot is when we do reviews of other schools to actually see how other places are doing it. And I think what it reminds us, and something that'll come up today, is that every organization, every business school's approach is unique and different, related to their own strategy and their own situation. I'm going to hand over to Steph now.
Hi there, my name's Steph Lambert, and I'm currently an undergraduate tutor in the Department of Management at the London School of Economics. Before I moved to that role in 2019, I was working with the EOCs team. So I see Keith and Antonia here today, who are 2 of my very close colleagues, and it's also where I met Anne and Ginny. So I conducted the initial research into the feasibility of a quality certification for online business and management education, and I was part of the team along with colleagues that developed the tools for the EOCs certification. I've taken part in a lot of online panels, arranging these and then taking part in them as well. They've been really invaluable to my experience within online education and gave me a really kind of broad knowledge about what was going on across the sector and in different countries as well. When I was doing that role, I was also working other contracts. I was responsible for redesigning a practice-based masters for therapists alongside content experts, taking a small course online for play therapists in the UK and across the world as well. And now in my role as undergraduate tutor, I focus specifically on academic mentoring. So initially this was a face-to-face role, but with the pandemic that has changed into something a lot more hybrid. So I bring a lot of learnings from that experience to the table as well. So I will pass back to Anne.
So I think what Anne was really talking about is what we've done over the last few years really is develop a program to take you on a journey. And what we're going to do is to try and give you an insight into that journey over the 3 modules that we've developed. We recognize that COVID's been breakneck speed, and that you've all had to grasp online learning, almost whether you like it or not. But now's the time possibly to stand back and think about how you might develop a more strategic approach to where your institution can be. So that's what we're going to do today, is go through those stages, which really reflect the 3 different modules that we've designed. And I think just to give you a bit of an insight is we have run this before, and we had very positive feedback on that. Much of what you hear today are things that you might already know, but actually having a support network around you to help guide you through that process is really important. So let's go to the beginning. And the beginning of any strategic development is taking stock. Where are we now? What are we good at? What are we not so good at? What resources do we have? What capabilities do we have and we don't have? So actually undertaking a really clear strategic audit of those strengths and weaknesses is really fundamental to driving things forward. I think Steph's got some insights.
So yes, as Ginny mentioned, this webinar itself has been on a journey of its own. We began putting it together before the pandemic for institutions that were looking to develop their online strategy, and then the pandemic happened and we had to change what we were doing to accommodate for that, because everybody all of a sudden had to go online. And as part of that, instead of running the 3 modules without an introductory session, we actually ran an introductory session to see what people wanted. So it was really interesting. We asked people to feedback on what they'd learnt during COVID, and I'd like to share with you some of the key findings that we had from the Padlet that day. So I hope you can all see that. Super. So yeah, I Will Survive was one of the themes that we had from the Padlet as well. We had a lot of institutions, in fact, the majority of institutions, that said that everything that they were doing was very, very reactive. So everybody was all of a sudden immersed into this online learning experience without perhaps the training, the know-how, the technical competence as well, the technical infrastructure of universities and higher education had to change really quickly about that as well. A lot of our participants in the July session as well saw a lot of problems, and I guess our conversation did focus on the challenges that everybody had been through, but there were also some positive sides to that as well. We saw that a lot of virtual events for students actually had a lot more uptake than they had in-person events, and that's something that we found at LSE as well. Things like virtual careers fair or training sessions were much more well attended by people because they could build it into their daily schedule without having to move from one room to another, and schedules became slightly easier to manage in that way as well. One of the biggest conversation pieces that we had, that I'm sure everybody here is very familiar with, is the use of all the different platforms. So it seemed that when we kind of hit COVID, those schools that weren't experienced with using lots of platforms all of a sudden had to deal with things like Teams, Microsoft Teams, Zoom, other platforms for sharing and disseminating content and as well for presenting as well. That was a massive challenge as well. And I think as well that there was a lot of understanding around the fact that senior leadership before had been quite reluctant to kind of do these mixed models and have faculty working from different locations, but that became a lot more accepted as well. And that was a positive that we found. Again, this point of agility came up quite a lot for institutions, and this was a real struggle. Some faculty were really quick to move, getting very much involved with how that they could deliver online education in a positive way for their students, but other faculty really struggled as well. So there was a lot of differentiation in the support that people needed to continue their educational provision as well. Student engagement was a big theme as well. How do you understand that the person on the other side of your screen is actually listening and engaged with your content? It's really difficult to see that. We all know that if you stand up in front of a room of people, you can get quite a lot of kind of physical body feedback. You can see who's engaging, you can see kind of the interest perhaps in your content. But when you're on Zoom and people have their cameras off, it can be a really difficult environment to teach in. So there was a lot of discussion around that. So that's some of the insights that we had about kind of taking stock, assessing the situation and understanding where the institutions were now so that we could understand how to move that forwards. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now.
Well, that was useful, Stephanie. And if you're really going to understand your internal situation in your institution, then you need input from people across the institution to gain a wider perspective from the range of faculty, learning support, IT, admin support, management, people from all over the areas that help deliver the online learning experience. So no doubt there will be diverse views, but that can in itself can you tell you a lot. So remember that all these colleagues of you are experts in their field, and their expertise will add new insight to what you want and try to achieve. My personal experience is that the more humble to others' views, knowledge and skills I am, the more I understand and the more value actually I get out of it. To support this collection of views and expertise, we have developed a questionnaire that you can use internally to pull together all these views, as well as some ideas and examples on how you might present these data to encourage a discussion internally in your own, for the way forward in your own institution. So over to you, Ginny.
Yeah, so Anne, that's really useful to gather information, but the group you haven't mentioned is students and the student voice. And I think our view is that we suspect institutions have actually gathered a lot of information, particularly during COVID, about students' views, about how they're doing, how they're coping with online, what are they see as the strengths and weaknesses. So we're not sure you necessarily need to gather more data. You might do it, that might be your situation, but our view is probably that you have a lot of data around your institution at granular levels, sometimes related to individual courses, sometimes related to the entire student experience. But that data you can draw together and really dig into and make use of in order to support your analysis of your current internal situation. So what we're really trying to do is get a fuller view of the customer's point of view. And we all know in business schools, that's a real challenge because you've got customers at various stages from inexperienced undergraduates right through to highly experienced exec ed clients. So again, thinking about the different voices and the different audiences that you're having to deal with, which will inform your approach to online learning.
Definitely, and a framework that we've found useful to make sense of your situation is the European Maturity Model for Blended Education. This was authored by scholars from Delft University in 2019 as part of a European Union funded project, which helps you to assess where an institution currently sits. So this is all about mapping out where your institution is at a number of different levels. That's at course and program level, at institutional level, and at strategic level as well. And this has a real resonance with our EOCS quality and criteria as well, that we look at all these different areas and map where institutions sit within this, but this was done on a much broader scale as well. This model is a framework that can be used to tackle any conceptual or implementation issues regarding blended learning, teaching and education. So it's got a real focus on blended education. It indicates which dimensions might be relevant for lecturers and educators, but also for institutions and policymakers as well. So it gives you a really holistic view. And yeah, sure, Mark, I can definitely share the framework with you in the chat in a second. So the general aim of the maturity model is to help institutions and inspire them and guide them to implement or improve blended learning into their institution. In that way, maturity doesn't necessarily mean quality of education as well. So I've got a slide to demonstrate this for you and perhaps give you a visualization of how it might work for you. So hopefully you can all see that. Just shout if you can't. So I've got the link there for you as well. So there are these 4 stages within the European maturity model, 5 stages, sorry, that you can position where your institution or where your strategy is in terms of blended education. So perhaps a lot of institutions during COVID, they might have been at this ad hoc stage that's on the very left-hand side of the screen. So very limited support for online and blended learning, no uniform strategy, and little recognition about the value that online and blended learning could have for an institution. So many places may have been in that situation at the beginning of COVID, but a lot of the institutions that we spoke to were more in this kind of early stage, so planning to support a system for online and blended learning, and working on a strategy is something that is work in progress, and that's something that these workshops are designed to help you with as well. There were some institutions that came to us in the last cohort of this workshop series that were in the consolidated or growth and development stage as well. There's always somewhere to go. And with this model, it's a really useful kind of level playing field for us all to understand where our institution is and perhaps where we can find value in feedback from peers or other people within the series. These arrows that I've got on the very top half of the slide are there to demonstrate that even though the quality of your kind of education, your online education provision might be very high, that doesn't necessarily mean it's a very mature model as well. We've got this strategic stage at the very right-hand side of the screen that you can see. And even if you're very mature in terms of your online strategy, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's a good or a quality online strategy. There's lots of other dimensions and voices that need to be taken into account there. So as I mentioned, we do use this as a kind of baseline to understand where you're at. And again, kind of looking at where you sit now allows you to understand where you might want to go. It might be that you don't want to offer the highest quality of online education, that you're quite happy with something that's perhaps in the growth and development stage and is something more kind of mediocre. Or it may be that you're in the very early stage and you're aiming for the kind of highest quality that you can in online education. The main point here is that not every size fits all with this journey, and that's something that we really try and draw upon in these sessions. So I'm going to stop sharing there and pass back over to Anne.
Thank you. That's a good framework, and I really encourage you to go and look it up. Sorry. Well, so assessing and understanding yourself and the different views living in the organization is an important starting point on the way to a strategy. Another dimension is the current capabilities and the resources your institution has in relation to online education. In the EOX review processes, we look at the range of areas. So those that has been through a EOX review will know this. And I will show you a couple of slides from the work that we're doing. Let's see. Here we go. And this might look familiar to some of you, and it shows you the quality, the 4 quality assessment areas that we assess in the EOX system for the review when we have the reviews. So first we have the institutional context. Here we ask questions to the applicant around how their online strategy is coupled with the institutional strategy, and also their general teaching and learning strategy, if they have, and they should have. And then we have the course composition area. Here we are interested in how their courses are designed with regards to pedagogical rationale, the delivery formats, and also technology that they apply. And then we have the course delivery and operations. Here we look for the supporting resources for students and faculty on both the academic, the technical, and the administration issues. And then we have the quality assurance processes. These are processes for feedback and how you monitor teaching and learning, as well as the institutional systems for quality assurance and, of course, improvement. So that is our main model for working within the EOX system. And then we are going into assessing a lot of different parts of the institutional's capacities and capabilities, like the supporting systems. Do we have a system of all the supporting systems needed to prevent or to invent or to scale the online activities? Do the systems have a potential to grow and develop as we like them according to market needs? And skills and competences. Do we have the many different skills needed to develop and deliver online education? And then management support. Do top management support that our institution deliver online education and wants to develop in that direction? So online education can be described as a field consisting of very many different competences, and we know that a whole team is needed to deliver excellent online learning. So how do we plan for such a new way of working, and how and where do we need to build capacity in the institution and capability? I will stop sharing now.
And that's great. So I think what we've really done so far is helped you to think about a framework you might use to really get an insight into the internal situation, that baselining. Where are you now? So that you can actually start to think about where you might be able to go. So in summary, by running that questionnaire, by gathering existing student feedback, reflecting on your current resources and capabilities, you really should have a good understanding about where you sit on that maturity model that Steph has given us, and also what your overall strengths and weaknesses are. And we all know that when we're developing strategy, is it better to try and improve those weaknesses or build on your strengths? And I think that's a debate to be had internally, but you really have to know what you're capable of moving on to before you actually almost decide what that onto might look like. So I think that takes us neatly on to the next stage.
Yes, exactly. So yeah, it does move us neatly on to the external environment as well. So once we've taken a deep look inside, then we also need to look outside as well and see how the environment is, and which we all know is certainly changing at a very fast pace in higher education. And that's not just as a result of COVID-19 and the changes that that's brought about, but trends that have been occurring for some time and that in many ways have been exacerbated by the pandemic. So a big conversation piece that we have is about fees. What is it that students are actually paying for? And especially within the UK context where we see very high university fees, students really want to understand what it is they're getting. They don't necessarily see the lack of funding that you get from government, they see what you deliver them. So how are you delivering what students are expecting? We've also got a highly competitive job market for our graduates as well. So how do we go about equipping our students with the right skills going forwards? How do we equip them with the right competencies? How do they understand how to navigate the workplace? What are we doing to make sure that our students are ready for that graduate job market should they wish to enter it as well? There's a lot of individualistic motivations as well, pushing for grade classifications, trying to be the best. That's always been a part of higher education. And also there's a lot more of a discussion around resilience and mental health within higher education institutions as well. How are you tackling that, especially in an online environment or an environment where you haven't got those human touch points with students anymore? How are you safeguarding them? How are you building them into be resilient individuals? When our students, especially undergraduate students, enter higher education, it's usually a rite of passage where they're learning and they're growing. How do you support them with that as well? And moving on from the kind of undergraduate story and into the postgraduate story, we have this whole new trend of lifelong learning and executive education, and how that fits into the working lives or the kind of home lives of learners that want to continue their learning. And also, how do you keep that relevant for them as well? So there's all these kind of external trends going on that exist both within kind of face-to-face education and online education. But the next stage, moving beyond the internal environment, is to look and map out this external environment and where you sit within that. So both the drivers and the competitors. So Anne, I'll pass back to you.
There we go. Unmute the new word. I think we all are familiar with the Pastel Analysis, where we identify different trends that will affect the market. These are political, economical, social, technological, environmental, and legal trends. So in our case, we look for trends for online learning. So if you are going to gain some real insight, then it's worth finding good sources for this online learning area, and finding reports and studies. EFMD has a lot. Please search the sites of EFMD. You will find different studies and reports there. And also you will find like McKinsey reports. They will always have, or all the consultancy companies will have some reports you can use. And such sources of knowledge and insight that will help you to identify some of the trends in each of these pastel areas. And I will show you one of my favorite trend reports. I'll share it here. This is the annual Horizon report. I'm sure many of you already know it, but if you don't know it, it's really worth to go and find it. It's like an annual report, and I think the 22 edition will come up pretty soon, like in April. They usually announce it. What I like in particular with this report is the trend analysis they have and all the scenario building they do. But also the description of the emerging technologies and emerging practices based on emerging technologies that higher education sees. And the report is work from expert panels all over the world. So it's I find it quite a good report, in that way, quite evidence-based, or at least opinion expert-based. So absolutely, I do encourage you to go and find that report and download it. It's in PDF when you find that. I can put the link in the chat. So let's see, I'll try to stop sharing here. So do we?
Yeah, so thanks, Anne. I think that's important. I'm just about to share my screen just to take you through a bit more of ways in which we can think about the external environment. I think I said at the start, these are things that you will have seen before. These aren't new models, but it's about how do you pull these models together to really make sense of that external environment. So Anne's given us some great insights into sources of information for these external trends, particularly related to online learning. And I think that's the thing that we've got to keep focusing on is, if you're developing an online learning strategy, you need to have the factors that relate to online learning, and particularly for us mainly in 8G in higher education and in business education in particular. But inevitably, we also need to think about looking at, through often the lens of the Porter's 5 Forces model, the various players in that market. So suppliers, new entrants, buyers, substitutes, and how competitive is that marketplace? So let's just look at how the online learning environment is changing. And if you think about it, how profitable is this marketplace? You know, there's been a huge amount of debate about the pressure on price as you go online and the ability to access MOOCs and other free online opportunities. So what does that mean for new entrants and the way we see them as business schools in terms of how we deal with them? And also other business schools who were never in online learning, who've already all of a sudden come in because they've had to develop the expertise because of the pandemic. And of course, the threat of substitutes. And you know, Steph's kind of picked up some issues. It's really interesting in the UK context in particular, there's been a big push to apprenticeship training. And yes, those courses are increasingly university-based, and Henley's been very, very active in that area. But it's really shifting the way in which we're designing and thinking about what is university education and what is higher education learning. The third area is the bargaining power of the customers. So those are the students. And I think Steph's already hinted at it, that students are much more willing to ask, what am I getting for my money? What value are you adding? And therefore really understanding how those customers can now access learning, potentially anywhere in the world if they like, through an online mechanism. And I think COVID, you saw that happening quite a lot. People saying, well, hang on, why don't I go to best in class rather than just my, quote, local university or university in my country, given that so many of us are now teaching at least in part or in English. And then we've got the suppliers, the Blackboards of this world, and the Pearsons and other people who are in there trying to supply us the technology and content, and how, you know, what strength have they got in us? And I think one of the conversations that we've often had with groups during the last time we ran it is the constraint sometimes that those suppliers are putting on you because you want to try and new innovative pedagogy, but actually the platform isn't allowing you to do it. So that, you know, there's really recognizing where those constraints are is important. And then finally is competitive rivalry. How fierce is the competition in this marketplace? I think it's changing. We'll just have to wait and see how it evolves. So that's really mapping out the kind of key stakeholders and players in the market. But the other model that we use during the program is the value curve, which comes from the work on blue ocean strategy. Now, some of you might well have seen this, some of you might not have. The example that's most often given is one related to Cirque du Soleil and the way in which they, through innovation, developed their product. In this case, it's an experience. And they did this by thinking, if you look at this bottom area down here, these are the kind of attributes that the product, that going to a circus actually is, that there's the price, the star performers, animal shows, et cetera, and then on the right hand side you'll see things like unique venue, and I know you can't see it where I've got you, artistic music and dance and themes. And that's really what Cirque du Soleil brought to the table. They said, okay, we're going to be different. We're not going to have animals, we're not going to have star performers, we're not going to have lots of arenas going on. We're going to make this a much more artistic, unique venue, just differentiate ourselves. So what they did is eliminate some attributes and increased or even developed new attributes on the right-hand side. And so what we use this model is to help you to think about what are the things you can do less of and what are the things you might want to do more of that you haven't even thought about yet. And that's why I think one of the things we're going to be talking about is in order to do this effectively, you really need a team of people to work on it. That team will have those multiple perspectives that Anne was talking about earlier on, but that team will also be useful for brainstorming to be able to develop this innovation by using a model like this. I'm going to stop sharing.
So yeah, using these frameworks, you should be able to embark on a better understanding of the changing external environment, as well as areas where there might be gaps and ways in which you might improve your online offering to develop your own identity and positioning. And that's taking into account the opportunities and threats as well. So it's a very complex thing, as we've described. The external environment in which we currently operate certainly provides a lot of food for thought. In the here and now and reacting to the impact of the pandemic, we have learned a lot. And what we can do next proactively is really important.
Yeah, so I think drawing this all together, you've done your internal analysis, you've done your external analysis, and now you've got to be setting that vision and strategy. Where do we want to go? And starting to set yourself some objectives for, let's say, the next 3 years. And in this marketplace, 3 years is a long time. It may be even shorter than that. What you're trying to do is build on what you've done through the crisis so that you develop something that's successful and sustainable. So our whole push here is how do we develop a sustainable strategy for online learning? The strategy's there to help you focus your attention, to figure out where you're going to put your resources, because we are all resource constrained, whether it's time, whether it's expertise, or whether it's money. Those limited resources we have to be used incredibly effectively and efficiently. So ideally, what we really would like to have is some short-term measures. So sometimes what we think of as low-hanging fruit that immediately we can put into action to demonstrate that we can push things forward and improve, move up that value within the maturity model. And then thinking about those long-term activities, how do you start to build them into a step change approach? Because it'll have to go into budgets. You'll have to be bringing new people in. And Anne already commented, online learning actually has a much bigger and more diverse team than when you're teaching face-to-face, because you've got online designers, you've got the technologists, you've got people creating video content, and many institutions have gaps in expertise and resource in that area. So it's thinking about where those might come from. So overall, I think what we're trying to do is get you to develop a strategy, a framework that you can take action on.
Exactly, and thank you, Ginny. And implementing strategies, special area, special topic, and we will touch upon the implementation when we have the workshop series. So, okay, what we have tried to demonstrate so far is that developing a strategy, that is a process or a journey where you need to collect data and information and have ways of interpreting and framing that knowledge with relevant tools. So this work is collecting information and data, but it's also a time for reflection. You need to not hurry too much. And it's good to do the reflection together. So exactly, this is not a one-man show. Good strategies, they are developed by teams and involve the wider community, and is moderated by dialogue and reflection. And that's also where implementation will be easier if you can really involve widely. So if colleagues are involved from the start, they will buy in to this direction and also the strategy implementation work. So finally, the key aim of a strategy, that is to ensure that colleagues are all working in the same direction and that resources are used to best effect, the capacity and the capabilities. It is a useful tool to sense check any action you take to see if it contributes to your objectives.
Exactly. And our aim with this program is to create a supportive community who can learn from each other and with each other at the same time. We find a lot of value in sharing experience and the richness of different views. So what you bring to this series of workshops is what you get out of it. And the last cohort were very keen to share. It was really rich, it was really insightful, and there was a lot to take from it as well. We've mentioned all throughout this webinar today that we've developed a range of tools that you can use through the process. So we've demonstrated a range of tools that are external, like the EDUCAUSE Horizon report, the maturity model, but we've also designed some tools off the back of this as well, including the questionnaire that Anne mentioned earlier on. So we have had other institutions use this tool before. It's not something that you have to do as part of this workshop series, but it's something that we highly encourage. It's something that's not shared with EFMD, and you don't have to share the outcomes with the other people on the workshop either. The main objective of it is for you to get a barometer of where your internal situation is. So what's going on in your institution. And part of that is understanding the views of the people that are working within your online provision, or the people that might be working on it in the future, and what their view of it is as well. So we have that survey, and we also provide you with the tools to analyze it and present those findings as well. So it's a kind of ready-made thing for you to use that can be a really insightful tool. We had 2 institutions use it before, and they had some really useful findings from it as well. So we really encourage you to use that. With around 15 or 30 or however many people are involved in your institution in terms of online learning, using it with them and understanding what their view is as well. We've also developed a learning journal, which is more of an individual tool for you as well. As part of this kind of online business education strategy, we understand that your role as an individual is very important as well, and that you'll be looking to develop yourself. So we've created a learning journal to capture your thoughts in a systematic way throughout this for your own use, but also for your use professionally as well. We've also created a PowerPoint template for you as well that you could use to develop as a presentation for use within your institution. So if you needed to make a case for online education or how that might work, with all of these tools that we've given to you within the workshop series, we've created a PowerPoint presentation for you to neatly summarize that to, say, stakeholders, to your deans, to anybody else that might be interested in online strategy as well. So we ask that participants do assemble some form of support group within their institution, because what we do outside of the workshops is really important as well. We want you to work in between the modules, relating to our point that, strategy isn't a one-man show. Just because you're attending these workshops doesn't mean that you can write a sterling online strategy. You need other voices at the table as well. So these working groups that you'll form, and we'll guide you with this as well, will help crystallize your learnings from the modules in line with your personal context and institutional goals, and in line with what a sustainable online strategy looks like for you. So as said, it's a very customized program as well. During the online sessions, we have incorporated opportunities to share your thoughts, ideas and problems with your other participants as well, and we will be using action learning principles. Overall, our programme is there to shape an impetus so that over the course of the 3 weeks, you can make some real progress in developing your institution strategy. It's not to sit down and listen and see what I can take away from it. It's something where you're going to come out with something tangible at the end of this as well. And we hope that the learning tools, insights and outcomes will also continue beyond these modules as well. So if you opt not to do the survey during the workshops or before the workshop, then that's a tool that you have in your toolbox for later on, should you want to use it. Which, leads us nicely to the role of this survey as well. I think I've talked about it a little bit already, but it's for you to understand more about your staff's experience of online learning, including what's gone well and what might have gone better. Of course, it's really important to get a lot of different views on this as well. And we've seen that from our experience in EOCS as well, both from the views of the certification boards and the success of our applicant institutions. Having different voices at the table creates the most interesting conversations. So we want you to immerse yourself into these and look at different standpoints as well. So I think that covers the survey, and I will pass on for any questions and answers, I believe.
Yeah, I think looking at the chat, we've had one question, which is related to who's the strategy aimed at, or what is it? Well, I think what we're saying is you could do this strategy at multiple levels. It could be at business school wide level, or it could be for a set of programs. So potentially a strategy for online undergraduate education would be perfectly possible. It probably needs to be big enough. A strategy just related to a course isn't really big enough. So I think we're talking about something that's probably a big part of your portfolio or the entire portfolio. But I know with full service business schools, the way your strategy for doing exec ed might be rather different than your strategy for online education for undergraduates. So I think you carve it up what's best for you. And when we've been bringing in these other institutions or organizations or other inputs, that's just giving you insights to how that marketplace is changing. So the ed tech companies and EDUCAUSE and McKinsey, they're all out there providing information to us that will really help provide better insights into the way that marketplace is changing. Does anyone else have any other questions? I mean, our aim has been to try and give you a whistle-stop tour through 3 weeks of 3 separate weeks over 3 weeks, 3 separate sessions over 3 separate weeks of the content that we would be developing and going through. No more questions? Well, I think that probably draws this session to a close, which is quite timely, because what we thought we might do is, if you have time and you'd like to stay for a few minutes, that Teresa's going to put you into breakout rooms. So if you just want to have an initial conversation with anybody in the room, because for us, peer-to-peer learning is fundamental to our approach. And we thought it might be an opportunity to meet some peers that hopefully you might meet again when you join us in just over a month's time. So can I thank you all for listening? And it's been great to have you with us today. So good luck in your